they really, really come out ahead. And I think Rocket in every way, we started backing Rocket when it was a 3 crore not-for-profit and we had written a 1 crore check. Today, their budget is upward of 40 crores and we've become a very small percent donor. And I think very soon they won't even need us. So I think they've in every way exemplified that, Gaurav.
Hello and a warm welcome to a very special podcast series, Unusual Suspects. I'm your host, Gaurav Chaudhary. This is a series about unraveling stories of entrepreneurs, investors, professional, of course, philanthropists who are disruptors yet not in your face. The disruptions have consistently delivered on the purpose and the mission they've embarked on. Their values are as strong as the mission. While they're ruthless in pursuing their ambition, they don't stray from being leaders who are not just admired for the vision and relentless pursuit, but also for how they're building an ecosystem of believers who consistently push the boundary. In each episode, I speak to one such leader, talking to her or him or them about their businesses, lives, inspirations, interests, challenges, pivot moments and turning points, successes, failures, and of course, the little agonies and ecstasies and joys. It is as much about their personal life stories as about their entrepreneurial, professional, and philanthropic journeys. Unusual Suspect streams on Earshot.in, Spotify.com, Apple Podcasts, YT Music, moneycontrol.com, and a host of other podcast streaming platforms and directories. For this episode, I'm delighted to have Aakanksha Gulati, CEO of ACT Grants, an Indian non-profit funding scalable tech-first social impact initiative. She's a board member at Teach for India, Tap India Foundation, Foster and Forge Foundation, and Allocate. She began her career in finance, Lehman Brothers, Bank of America Securities, and had a stint at consulting at the Boston Consulting Group. She transitioned to education and development, served as city director at Teach for India, and co-founded Toasty Nation. Aakanksha holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management and a BA in Math and Economics from Duke University. She's also certified in secondary school education. In this episode, we'll explore how ACT is pioneering the use of patient venture-style capital to fund tech-first social innovations for Bharat. Along the way, we will also examine the unique role of catalytic capital in creating more inclusive, sustainable, and impact-first future for India. Delighted to have you on the show, Aakanksha.
Very, very excited to be here, Gaurav. Thank you.
Aakanksha, let's start off with a very fundamental question, which I need to understand and our listeners also need to understand, is the concept of quote-unquote patient venture style capital, and ACT actually champions this as a catalyst for scalable social impact. Social impact by nature and definition is not always scalable as rapidly as, say, a technology venture. How does this philosophy shape your approach to venture philanthropy, and in what key ways does it diverge from traditional philanthropy or programmatic interventions? This is particularly when funding early stage tech-first solutions for Bharat. Aakanksha?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start this with, Gaurav. I think today ACT is known for its patient capital venture philanthropy approach, but I want to start by sharing that, that's our how. It wasn't the why that drove us to start doing the work that we're doing. So to us, it's more of a medium. But the why behind, how ACT came into being, and also, my own evolution, like you shared, I obviously started out in the finance and consulting spheres and had made a shift into the impact space about 10, 11 years ago. I think the problem statement that drove many of us to ACT was that the impact space, or the social sector, as it is known, had not changed dramatically in the past many decades. And by that, what I mean is that the fundamental way of delivering impact had continued to be very high touch, very much on ground, very human intensive. And when we dug a little bit deeper into that, we also found that the funding was, structured in a way that really enabled that more than anything else. And I spent almost 6 years at Teach for India as well. My latest role, there was as a chief program officer, and I was also fundraising for Teach for India. Um, and, as the sector was evolving, the bar was only increasing for social sector organizations to raise funding. So what was happening with CSR as well as large international foundations was that to raise money, you really had to prove that you were a tried, tested, validated model that was delivering impact. It was almost like you had to, guarantee with 100% certainty that if you got philanthropic capital, you would guarantee that impact was happening. And so obviously, as you can imagine, that's easiest when, you're working on the ground. So if you're doing relief work on the ground, or if you're teaching kids on the ground, actually there is highest probability that when you're spending time and it's human intensive and people intensive, some level of impact will be delivered. So essentially what that did, Gaurav, was that, we were kind of saying that isn't it time that there were some new innovations that we started to see in the impact space. The scale of problems and social problems across countries was only increasing. In India, if we just look at the scale, if you look at the 20 to 25,000 per month income, which isn't great, you're talking 3 to 4 lakhs income per annum. Almost 1 billion people belong to families that fall in that bracket in India, and we hear often about the story of two Indias. And so right around when COVID hit, I think a big light bulb went on in many of our minds. I think COVID was a huge catalyst in actually proving that technology could be something that could be a great lever in delivering social change. And I think few examples from that time, 2020, obviously, schools shut, everything went into lockdown. India actually had the largest period of schools being shut, almost 2 years, including my own kids, didn't go to school. And so naturally, as you know, students and the learning process migrated online. And I think the biggest thing that happened is that millions of families acquired their first smartphone during COVID so that their children could come online and learn. And the second thing that happened was that learning actually did. So a huge behavior change also happened. So I won't go into too much detail, but we saw similar things with, health. Healthcare system moved online. Our vaccinations were online. And then, somewhere in the middle, UPI came and really changed the game. And so you started seeing that, this very clear opportunity that for 1 billion people in India armed with a smartphone and one of the cheapest internet in the world, actually, this could be a great, great way and a platform for us to build on and really think about delivering social change, perhaps in a different way, perhaps using technology, to supplement, which is equally important, the on-ground people-intensive way of doing things. So that's what kind of brought us to ACT. And funding for tech first or product first innovative solutions is very different. You don't have anything that's already tried, tested, validated. You need an upfront investment in the product and the technology. And therefore, patient capital becomes really important. Therefore, high-risk capital becomes really important. I mean, if you think about what's happened with India's startup ecosystem, between 2014 and 2024, almost $146 billion have been raised by 10,000 startups, So you require that heavy upfront, risky investment in product and technology, and then to get some winners who can really change the world. And so long story short, Gaurav, to answer your question, our main mission at ACT is, can we really catalyze solutions that are tech first, product first, that are innovative, and that can really now supplement the work that's happening in the impact space to create social change. And if that's really the larger, vision, then we know that to get to a different outcome, you have to do things differently. And so our way of doing things differently is that we don't do programmatic funding. We don't only back tried tested models. We actually use a patient capital venture-like approach to philanthropy so that we can really help incubate and catalyze more innovations for the social space.
Absolutely. Very well said. Akanksha, ACT's model is built around identifying and backing transformative tech first social startups at the earliest, the very early stages. Now, if I may ask you, just help me understand this. What core criteria do you assess? There's also the question of systemic potential of an idea, and there's also the question of the founder, because when you're investing in an early stage venture, you will also judge and assess the founder's ability to scale it sustainably. And how have startups like Rocket Learning, for instance, Indra Water, or Periwinkle exemplified this model in action?
So I'll begin by saying it's definitely not an exact science. Like I said, it's a high risk way of doing philanthropy, which, and to be honest, it doesn't sit well with everyone, because a lot of times when it's philanthropic money, people want to make sure that it's not getting wasted and it's really going to the right causes. So I'll start by saying that even for us, it's still evolving. We think we're getting better. Um, and I'll share what we have found to be some criteria that have really served us well. First and foremost, which you alluded to, Gaurav, the founder is just so critical in any early stage venture, be it for social impact or be it, a traditional commercially minded venture. And so, typically similar things that VCs would look for, right? Like, is this a founder with a big and bold vision? Are they a strong operator? Are they a strong strategic thinker? Not very different there, right? Both in terms of the importance of the founder and, some of the early attributes you would look for. The one distinguishing factor I will say, which has at least served me well, when I have those early conversations, is what I call, the founder's why. And I have personally found that their, connection to a larger mission or an impact mission is really, really critical. Social entrepreneurs, and we back both for-profit and not-for-profit founders. Um, if you're a not-for-profit founder, you're certainly not doing it, to become rich. But even if you're a for-profit social entrepreneur, big riches is not something you're going to get to, right? And so why are they doing it? They're clearly not doing it for personal monetary benefit. And often we find that, these founders who we've backed, and especially all the ones that you've mentioned, whether it's, Rocket Learning, Periwinkle, Indra Water founders, they have a really clear why that's driving them. And somewhere we've often also found there's a lived experience, which is a big one. So we have founders who've actually grown up in very rural areas and seen some of the challenges they're trying to solve for firsthand. They've experienced some gross levels of inequity, and that's, set a fire in them that they really want to solve for. So there's typically this, mission or purpose larger than themselves, a divine discontent, or, a lived experience that's so important to them, that they want to leave the world a better place, and they want to, decrease suffering in some way, shape, or form. So I think that's one additional factor that we look for in the early stage. The other big two factors are, the second one is problem statement. And again, not very different from VCs. We do look for founders, given its technology and given, we feel technology can really lead to a lot of scale. We look for folks who are solving for a big problem statement. So issues that millions and millions of people are facing, or issues that are of a very large scale, and therefore they can really make a dent in impact if this was to take off. And that's also the reason why typically we would have some thesis areas, right? So in health, for example, we have a thesis area around mental health, cancer screening, TB, just to share examples. So what the thesis, and they're loosely held thesis areas, but what that does is it also gives us a point of view that we hold. So we already know which some of the bigger problem statements are, and we're able to often validate when founders start talking to us in the early days. And again, typically the best founders we have found have one really good critical insight within that problem statement that lands, and that again gives us the conviction that they're onto something. So as an example, Curious Junior founders um, who we had backed during COVID, had realized that tech jobs are going to be a huge opportunity for, livelihoods for India, even as, we were starting to hear murmurs about Gen AI and other things. But they found that, most of Bharat, the billion people category that I described, did not have access to coding. Most of the coding platforms that had taken off during COVID required kids to have a laptop. They were English medium. And so they were basically saying, Bharat kids today don't have access to that. And they built one of the first mobile first coding platforms for kids in vernacular languages that we had seen. And so it wasn't just the here and now, it was also this larger vision that, kids across income levels in India need access to coding now, because perhaps their future depends on it, and it's going to be an important part of their education. So a big problem statement and a key insight within that is the second thing. And the third, I would say, is definitely, an early MVP or a product where we can see. And again, over time, we've kind of gained a lot of knowledge around, what are those relevant, relatable product features that we know will work for the audience that we're looking to serve, but a product that we feel can actually address the problem statement that they're talking about. So these are typically, again, the early things that we look for. And typically post our first check, the folks who we find really come ahead, again, not very different, but I would imagine from what we see in venture capital as well, is, founders who are able to learn fast, fail fast, pivot fast, continue to have a lot of grit. We find that even beyond the product, it's really product market fit. So the model itself, whether it's for profit or not for profit, will go through many, many iterations. So, folks who really will create what we call those social unicorns are going to be people who, pivot this many times over and have that, endurance to go long. And somewhere again, I find that founders who really have the ability to attract two things, talent and money, can really somehow get people to share their vision and get the best talent to join their teams. And similarly, get donors and investors to see their vision and give them money. They really, really come out ahead. And I think Rocket, in every way, we started backing Rocket when it was a 3 crore not for profit, and we had written a 1 crore check. And today, their budget is upward of 40 crores, and we've become a very small percent donor. And I think very soon they won't even need us. So I think they've in every way exemplified that, Gaurav.
Absolutely. Akanksha, venture philanthropy at ACT goes far beyond capital deployment, and there is much more to venture philanthropy than just, setting aside some capital and giving some money or cutting out checks. Can you walk us through how you support grantees across the life cycle? Say, for instance, very briefly, from an initial discovery and due diligence to strategic scaling, and what sets your engagement model apart within India's growing impact ecosystem? Because this is one area that has seen a lot of growth in India and is growing, will continue to multiply over the next several years. Akanksha.
Yeah, I'll share this quite quickly, Gaurav. But we have something that we call the 3 Cs. So capital, of course, is critical. Like I said very early, without capital, no one's going to be able to build these products and innovations. But outside of capital, we have connections and collectives. So connections typically means, we really pride ourselves on being able to constantly connect our founders as much as we can to a very cross-sectoral group of people. And that's very much a part of like a core belief for us, which is that, the social problems that we talk about, whether it's the education crisis or health or the climate crisis, we know that these are such interdisciplinary, issues that no one person from any one sector can solve them. And so even for our founders, some of them might have a very strong technology background, but then it becomes really important for them to perhaps connect with, experts who really understand, the end stakeholders that they're serving. Or some will have the reverse, and we feel that if we can just connect them to product or UI UX experts from India's startup ecosystem, they'll learn a lot. Academicians, and then for many of them, scale will come from embedding themselves in the government education or the healthcare system. And so understanding how the government works is not something that all founders know in the early days. So connections is really important. And typically, once they get a grant from us, we'll work very closely with them to say, okay, who can we, connect you with? And thanks to the work that ACT had done during COVID, we're very fortunate to have a community that spans India's startup ecosystem, public, private sector, philanthropy, as well as the social impact ecosystem. So connections is the second one. And the third is collectives, which is wherever we see an area of support coming up again and again for our founders, we typically then create a programmatic intervention around it. So for example, we were finding that, especially as a social enterprise, finding great tech talent is going to be hard for you. You don't have VC level of funding. You're not a large tech company, but you do need the latest and greatest on what's happening in technology, and especially with Gen AI over the last year and a half, that's become a very real need for our founders. So we started something called Tech Advisors about 3 years ago, completely volunteering program for techies in India's startup ecosystem to volunteer and work with founders for a 12-week period to really help guide them on very sharply identified tech problem statements. So that became a program because it was a recurring problem that we saw. Similarly, for a lot of our health tech innovations, scale is going to come from scaling with the public healthcare system. So there we have something called the implementation network, where the solutions will work closely with on-ground organizations like CCAMP, who really understand how to conduct pilots, validation studies that are important for states to see before you can scale through the state mechanism. So again, so now any of our health founders will now pitch to an implementation networks, will get picked up with some of them, and that then becomes their scale avenue over time. So that's what we call the collectives model. But typically, these are the three big ways in which we support our founders. We found that the best of them ultimately, though, are driving their relationship with us versus vice versa. Like we find that actually, they will come to us and say, these are the connects we need, or this is the need for a collective. And we find that they are really able to then take what we have to offer to the next level.
Absolutely, Aakanksha. And final question, you did mention about social unicorns and how ACT is looking to catalyze the next generation of social unicorns, particularly for Bharat, as opposed to the trailblazing unicorns from the large metropolises. Can you just briefly take us through what have been the key learnings from your journey so far? How do you envision the organization's role evolving, say, for the next 5 years in the medium term to build a more collaborative, tech-driven, and impact-first future for India, Aakanksha?
Great question, Gaurav. We've had many, many learnings, and we like to believe we've kind of not even scratched the surface. We have a long way to go. Again, how I think about it often is, if 10,000 startups in the commercial world have raised 146 billion, what will the equivalent look like of tech startups in the social space? And that remains to be seen. But in terms of learnings, I'll share a few. One is, I think, just when it comes to social impact, how can we actually start thinking tech first? And this is a shift. I do recognize, including myself, when I moved into the impact sector about 10 years ago, so often it is the human stories or the story of that child, and how getting a good education changes the trajectory of their life, or, that one person who got the right health intervention at the right time, and how that changed their life. So the human element of it is very important. I understand that. But I think really seeing technology as an enabler is going to be really important for us in the coming time. Because again, if we really want to solve for these crisis areas in our lifetime, scale is going to be important. And if scale is important, technology and government will be parts of the answer. And interestingly, we're finding that today, government at various levels is looking for technology. So we're seeing a huge amount of openness. Even in the work that we do, there's a whole, project that we're doing in Karnataka on, incubating an innovation space for, again, tech-first health solutions to come forward. So we're seeing that the time is really right. The foundation of what's needed seems to be there. And so anyone whether you're a founder or a funder in the social impact space, if you can really start thinking tech first, I think we'll make huge leaps as a sector. The second, and again, this really comes from my heart, also having worked on the other side, as an implementer and an operator of a large social enterprise, which was Teach for India. How do we start having a little bit more of a risk mindset when it comes to philanthropy? Like, can we take more risks? And again, like I said earlier, that comes with, the downfall of, maybe some funding will not lead to anything, but the winners will really change the world. So having a risk mindset, but also I think treating social entrepreneurs as entrepreneurs. Like I said, often there's a huge amount of pressure that, impact has to be delivered. So the risk and the founder element of social entrepreneurs goes hand in hand. How do we really let our founders also take risks, make mistakes, learn, innovate? Because the more mistakes we make, the more failure there is, the more learning there will be that will really push the ecosystem forward. So in many ways, what I'm saying is, how can we actually become okay with failure? Because embedded in those failures will be huge leaps and successes for us to be able to solve social challenges in India. Thanks, Gaurav.
Thanks, Aakanksha. Thanks for delightful and insightful conversation and sharing your deep insights and perspective on a multitude of areas. Thank you so much for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation with us.
Thank you. It was very fun to be here and engage in the conversation with you.